It was just another busy afternoon at the mall, crowds shuffling between stores, the hum of chatter filling the air, and the faint scent of pretzels wafting from the food court. But in the middle of it all, something was about to happen that would turn an ordinary day into one nobody would forget. A woman, dressed in a simple yet elegant outfit, was browsing through a rack of clothes at a high-end boutique. She was calm, composed, and carried herself with a quiet confidence. But, to the untrained eye, she was just another shopper, another face in the crowd. What no one realized was that this woman, this seemingly ordinary black lady, was about to flip the script on everyone in the most unexpected way. The tension began to build when a store employee, a young woman with a sharp tone and a judgmental glare, approached her. "Excuse me, ma'am," the employee said, her voice dripping with suspicion. "Can I help you with something?" The way she said it wasn't friendly, it was accusatory, as if she'd already made up her mind about the woman standing in front of her. The shopper looked up, her expression calm but firm. "No, thank you. I'm just looking," she replied politely. But the employee wasn't satisfied. She crossed her arms and took a step closer, her eyes narrowing. "We've had some issues with shoplifting lately," she said, her tone implying the unspoken accusation. "I'm going to need to check your bag." The shopper's eyes flickered with something, disbelief, maybe, or frustration. But she didn't argue. She simply handed over her bag, her posture straight, her dignity intact. The employee rifled through it, her movements quick and careless, as if she were already convinced she'd find something. But there was nothing. No stolen items, no evidence of wrongdoing. Just the personal belongings of a woman who had done nothing wrong. The employee hesitated for a moment, clearly embarrassed, but instead of apologizing, she doubled down. "I'm going to need to call security," she said, her voice shaky but defiant. Just to be sure. What happened next was a blur. Security arrived, two burly men who seemed more than eager to flex their authority. They didn't ask questions. They didn't listen to her side of the story. They just grabbed her by the arms, their grips tight and unyielding, and marched her through the store. The other shoppers stared, some whispering, others pulling out their phones to record. The woman didn't struggle. She didn't yell. She just kept her head high, her eyes steady, as if she knew something they didn't. But the humiliation was real. The injustice was real. And as they led her away, the crowd's murmurs grew louder, a mix of curiosity and discomfort filling the AIR.by the time they reached the security office. The situation had escalated. The store manager, a middle-aged man with a stern face and a clipboard in hand, was waiting. He didn't look at her, not really. He just started barking orders, demanding answers, treating her like she was already guilty. But then something changed. The woman, who had been silent up until this point, finally spoke. Her voice was calm but commanding, cutting through the chaos like a knife. "Do you know who I am?" she asked, her tone leaving no room for interruption. The room fell silent. The security guards exchanged uneasy glances. The manager hesitated, his clipboard lowering slightly. Who are you?" he stammered, his confidence wavering for the first time. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small badge, holding it up for everyone to see. The room seemed to freeze. The badge gleamed under the fluorescent lights, its emblem unmistakable. The manager's face went pale. The security guards took a step back, their hands dropping to their sides. And the employee who had started it all? She looked like she was about to faint. Because this wasn't just any badge. This was the badge of the police chief. The woman they had just humiliated, the woman they had just arrested, was the highest-ranking law enforcement officer in the city. But the story doesn't end there. Because what happened next would shock everyone, even the police chief herself. As the reality of the situation sank in, the room erupted into chaos. The manager started stammering apologies. The security guards looked like they wanted to disappear, and the employee who had accused her was in tears. But the police chief? She wasn't done. She had a few things to say, and they weren't going to be pretty. The tension in the room was palpable, the air thick with regret and fear. And just as she was about to speak, just as she was about to reveal what would happen next, the door burst open. Someone else had arrived, someone no one was expecting. And that's when things really got interesting. The door swung open with such force that it slammed against the wall, making everyone in the room jump. All eyes turned to the figure standing in the doorway, a tall, broad-shouldered man in a sharp suit, his face a mask of barely contained anger. His presence was commanding, and the room seemed to shrink under his gaze. He didn't say a word at first, just stood there, taking in the scene. The police chief, still holding her badge, the security guards frozen in place, the manager, clutching his clipboard like a lifeline, and the employee who had started it all, now visibly shaking. The man's eyes narrowed as they landed on the police chief, and for a moment, no one dared to breathe. "Chief Daniels," he finally said, his voice low and steady but with an edge that made it clear he wasn't happy. "What the hell is going on here?" The police chief, Chief Daniels, turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "Deputy Mayor Harris," she replied, her tone calm but firm. "I was just about to ask the same question." The room seemed to grow even quieter, if that was possible. The deputy mayor? Here? Now? This was no longer just a case of mistaken identity or an overzealous employee. This was something bigger, something messier, and everyone in the room could feel it. Deputy Mayor Harris stepped inside, closing the door behind him with a deliberate click. He crossed his arms, his eyes scanning the room as if he were assessing a crime scene. "I got a call saying there was an incident involving the police chief," he said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "Imagine my surprise when I find out it's you, Chief Daniels, being escorted out of a store like some common criminal." His words were heavy with implication, and the tension in the room skyrocketed. Chief Daniels didn't flinch. She met his gaze head-on, her posture as steady as ever. "I was shopping," she said simply, "and then I was accused of shoplifting. Apparently, my presence here was suspicious." The deputy mayor's jaw tightened, and he turned to the store manager, who looked like he wanted to melt into the floor. "Is this true?" he demanded. The manager nodded quickly, his face pale. "Why, yes, sir," he stammered. "But it was a misunderstanding. We didn't know." Deputy Mayor Harris cut him off with a sharp wave of his hand. "A misunderstanding?" he repeated, his voice rising. "You accuse the police chief of shoplifting? Do you have any idea how bad this looks? Not just for you, but for the entire city." The manager opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He just stood there, looking like a man who knew his career was over. But Chief Daniels wasn't done. She stepped forward, her badge still in hand, and addressed the deputy mayor directly. "This isn't just about me," she said, her voice firm but not unkind. "This is about how people like me are treated every day. I may be the police chief, but today, I was just another black woman in a store, being judged and humiliated. For no reason. And if it can happen to me, it can happen to anyone." Her words hung in the air, heavy with truth, and for a moment, no one knew what to say. The deputy mayor looked at her, his expression unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, something that might have been respect, or maybe just caution. Before he could respond, the employee who had accused Chief Daniels suddenly burst into tears. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed, her voice breaking. "I didn't know. I thought." She couldn't finish her sentence, but she didn't need to. The damage was done. Chief Daniels looked at her, her expression softening just a little. "I accept your apology," she said quietly, "but this isn't just about you. It's about a system that allows this kind of thing to happen. It's about assumptions and biases that need to change." The employee nodded, tears streaming down her face, but it was clear that this wasn't the end of the conversation. Not by a long shot. Deputy Mayor Harris cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention back to him. "This is a mess," he said bluntly. "A big, public mess. And it's going to take a lot of work to clean it up." He turned to Chief Daniels, his expression serious. "We need to talk. Privately." She nodded, her face unreadable once again. "Agreed," she said. The two of them moved toward the door, leaving the others in the room to stew in their guilt and regret. But as they stepped into the hallway, Chief Daniels paused and looked back at the store manager and the security guards. "This isn't over," she said, her voice calm but firm. "We'll be in touch." The door closed behind them, leaving the room in stunned silence. The store manager sank into a chair, his head in his hands. The security guards exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of what to do next. And the employee who had started it all just stood there, crying quietly, her world turned upside down in a matter of minutes. Outside, Chief Daniels and Deputy Mayor Harris walked down the hallway, their footsteps echoing in the empty space. Neither of them spoke at first, but the tension between them was palpable. Finally, the deputy mayor broke the silence. "This is going to blow up," he said, his voice low. "The media's going to have a field day with this." Chief Daniels nodded. "I know," she said, "but maybe that's not such a bad thing. Maybe it's time people saw what's really going on." Deputy Mayor Harris stopped walking and turned to face her. "You're playing a dangerous game, Chief," he said, his eyes narrowing. "This could backfire on all of us." She met his gaze, her expression steady. "Or it could be the wake-up call this city needs," she replied. "Either way, I'm not backing down." The two of them stood there for a moment, locked in a silent battle of wills. Finally, the deputy mayor sighed and shook his head. "You always did have a way of stirring the pot," he said, his tone a mix of frustration and admiration. Chief Daniels allowed herself a small smile. "Someone has to," she said. "Now, let's figure out how to handle this before it gets any worse." As they walked away, the weight of what had just happened settled over the mall like a storm cloud. The story was far from over, and the consequences of that day would ripple through the city for weeks to come. But one thing was clear. Chief Daniels wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for everyone who had ever been judged, humiliated, or treated unfairly because of who they were. And she wasn't going to stop until things changed. But as she and the deputy mayor disappeared around the corner, one question lingered in the air, unanswered and unsettling. What would happen next?